The boy arrived at dawn, and the hospital lights made his skin look like paper left too long in the sun. By the time his wheelchair slid past triage, the night shift had learned his name and the day shift had learned his prognosis. On the gurney's metal rails, his mother's hands trembled like bird wings, beating at a storm no one could see but everyone could hear in the hush that followed them down the corridor. The urgency was not siren loud, not a code in crimson letters, but something stealthier, the ticking that lived inside him, relentless, private, counting a life in stolen quarters rather than whole years. Noah had just turned 12, though his face argued for 36. His bones had more winters than birthdays, his joints complained like old doors. His heart wore itself down as if dragging a sled uphill through mud. He knew the arithmetic better than any doctor. 1 candle on a cake cost him 3 in the mirror. He wore a hoodie that had belonged to his mother's younger brother, and the sleeves bunched at his wrists where the fabric could not decide how old to be. The hoodie smelled faintly of detergent and sea salt and the tired sweetness of mint gum, and he took comfort in that because there was precious little left that felt his size. The nurses at 7C tried not to stare, but hospitals curate their own museums, and Noah was a rare exhibit even for them. Word traveled quickly, not in gossip, but in the quiet choreography of clinicians who recognize a story as it walks toward them, the kind that asks for the best of everyone and still demands payment in the end. A laminated sign outside his room bore his name, and beneath it someone had taped a paper clock with movable hands. A volunteer from Child Life had left it there, perhaps thinking of games, perhaps thinking of control. Noah glanced at it once, then turned it face down on the tray table, as if to teach the clock a lesson in manners. Dr. Elena Morrow entered without fanfare. She was the kind of physician who spoke softly because she had learned that certainty rarely needed volume. Genetics had chosen her before she chose it. Childhood afternoons spent dismantling broken radios with her father, late nights memorizing the grammar of DNA like a secret language that could forgive mistakes. Her coat pockets carried a penlight, a folded algorithm for differential diagnoses, and a safety pin. She believed in tools that were small and precise and easy to lose. She believed in second chances even when the lab didn't. She paused at the threshold, reading the space the way some people read weather, humidity in the air, the drift of breath from machines, the stiffness in the mother's shoulders, the way the boy sat upright as if he owed the chair an apology for using it. Rafael Torres followed a minute later, a cardiologist whose confidence bore the scuff marks of cases he'd nearly lost. His colleagues called him the patient's advocate and meant it. Administrators called him a complication and meant it. He had the habit of pushing his sleeves to his elbows before difficult conversations, as if bracing his skin for impact. When he saw Noah he did not blink, because blinking, like sympathy, sometimes looked like retreat. He took the mother's hand, introduced himself, and let his palm become a shoreline where her panic could break without drowning her. He did not look at Elena, not at first. They had the kind of professional history that makes eye contact feel like shipwrecks and rescue ropes at the same time. The chart said accelerated aging with a progeroid signature that laughed at neat classifications. The lab said strain and scarcity. The imaging said heart strain, joint damage, microfractures that read like frost lines in stone. The whisper in the room said hurry. Noah studied their faces with the care of someone who knew that adults often telegraphed the truth with their cheekbones before their mouths caught up. He had grown skillful at recognizing the little betrayals, the sigh masked as a throat clear, the eyebrows that met for a moment and pretended they were strangers. He did not hate them for it. He hated the numbers more. Elena spoke to him as if the room could shrink to the size of his chair. She told him her plan the way a cartographer might describe an unmapped coast. No promises, only coordinates, a path through the fog and plenty of erasers. She described a trial not yet open to children, a delivery vector redesigned like a better ferry, a set of enzymes that could, with any luck, stop the soldiers who mistook his cells for trespassers. She did not mention the ones who had failed, the children whose names traveled with her like stones in her coat. There is a mercy to omission when the truth has not yet earned the right to speak. Raphael listened, arms crossed, mind pacing. He had seen therapies that promised miracles and delivered bills. He knew the heart was a ledger with finite credit, and Noah had been spending against it for years. The mother Lydia wore exhaustion like a religion. Faith in small things had kept her alive, a bedside bell without dust, a sandwich that didn't taste like resignation, a parking ticket forgiven by a guard with a daughter the same age. She had learned to sleep in waiting rooms with jacket sleeves as blankets and coffee lids as clocks. When Elena finished, Lydia did not ask for probabilities, she asked for mornings. Could this give him mornings that felt like mornings, not like borrowed afternoons? Could it make the stairs into something other than an opponent? Could her son outgrow the hoodie in a direction that meant life? Elena did not promise. She said she would fight the review board, she would fight the calendar, she would fight the cruel arithmetic at the center of the boy's biology. She explained how consent worked in law and how choice worked in grief. She told Lydia that ethics was not a courtroom but a bridge, and they would walk it together, even when its planks complained beneath their weight. Raphael added that while the therapy moved through bureaucracy's maze, there were things they could do now: optimize his heart's rest, teach his body to waste fewer steps, borrow strength from sleep that honored him like an ally rather than a truce. Noah listened, quiet, like a person measuring a suit he could not afford. He thought of his birthday cake 3 weeks ago, how the frosting had melted against the heat of too many candles, how the wax pulled like fallen flags. He had wished for a season that lingered. He had wished for knees that didn't sound like radio static. He had wished, most of all, to surprise time by not showing up where it wanted him. He was old enough to understand that wishes are tender negotiations, rarely honored in full, often refused, occasionally rerouted into something close enough to keep breathing. The hospital breathed with him. Monitors murmured lullabies in binary. Gurneys grumbled their way down hallways with the dignity of old trains. A janitor hummed a song that had no words but many exits. Outside, a gull circled the parking deck as if searching for a misplaced ocean. Inside, Elena pulled the sliding glass door almost closed, left it open to fingers for the kind of privacy a hospital allows, and sat on the window ledge, as if positioning herself at the border of light and sterile air. She asked Noah what he loved to do when the clock forgot to hunt him. He said he drew buildings he would never live in, with staircases that didn't tire you out and windows that understood the difference between morning and glare. He said he liked maps and the promise of destinations, even imaginary ones, especially imaginary ones because no one gets lost there unless they want to be. Elena told him that maps were agreements between the world and the person holding the paper. Sometimes the world lied, sometimes the paper did. The art was not to demand honesty but to keep your compass tender and your feet curious. She told him that inside the body was a city, too, with neighborhoods that bickered and bureaucrats that misfiled orders and highways that needed repair. She told him that her job was urban planning with better music. For a moment Noah smiled in the way that children do when they recognize themselves in an adult's metaphor. It made him look briefly his age. When they stepped out, Elena and Raphael stood shoulder to shoulder without speaking. The air between them felt like the tense beauty after a storm makes the trees shine. Their history was not a scandal, not even a rumor, only a set of chapters written in parallel and shelved side by side. They had believed, once, that conviction could be a form of intimacy, and perhaps it still was, if they could remember to forgive the parts of conviction that mimic arrogance. Elena said she would petition the board by noon. Raphael said he would tune the cardiology regimen as if he were adjusting a stringed instrument before a difficult sonata. They did not talk about dinner or regrets or the night 2 years ago when a different child's case had burned them both and left them cautious with matches. Noah slept that afternoon in a chair tilted like a question mark. Lydia dozed with her head where her son's knees would be if his growth made more sense. The clock-faced volunteer returned and, finding the paper clock flipped over, replaced it with a paper sun taped to the glass. She had drawn rays thick enough to withstand the air conditioner's breath. When Noah woke he saw the sun and, for a moment, let the room be morning. He asked the nurse for water, not because he was thirsty but because he liked the sound of ice deciding where to be in a cup. The nurse brought 2 cups, one for him, one for his mother, and for a while they drank in silence like people sharing a secret they could not yet pronounce. There is a kind of bravery peculiar to those who live on countdowns. They learned the art of deliberate slowness. Noah practiced it that evening, tracing the edges of the paper sun with his eyes, calibrating his breath to the monitor's rhythm, choosing not to measure how many times the hallway clock cleared its throat. He thought of the buildings he would build, the ones whose elevators arrived as soon as you pressed the button, the ones whose roofs grew gardens where the wind spoke gently. He imagined a stairwell painted the color of patience. He imagined doctors who didn't look heroic or defeated, just present, sleeves rolled, palms empty, ready for whatever the next minute decided to bring through the door. When the next minute did arrive, it wore a clipboard and a badge and the polite authority of institutional thresholds. The ethics chair had granted Elena 5 minutes to convince a room that a boy whose years cost triple should be allowed to borrow therapy from a tomorrow not yet evenly distributed. Across the campus, Raphael stood at an echocardiogram machine, watching Noah's heart draw its own seismograph, each wave a small geography, each valley a promise to return. Lydia sat with a styrofoam cup and the paper sun and the kind of hope that does not float at grips, white-knuckled, and waits. Behind the glass, the boy closed his eyes and tried to remember his favorite sound from before the hospital had taught him new ones. It was rain on the tin awning outside their kitchen window, drumming like friendly fingers, telling him that time could be music when it wanted, and once, maybe, it had wanted him. The meeting room smelled of burnt coffee and fluorescent fatigue. A long oval table cut through the space like a scar, and on it, folders sprawled open, thick, stubborn witnesses of bureaucracy. Dr. Elena Morrow sat at one end, spine straight, fingers interlaced to hide the tremor she hadn't earned but carried anyway. Around her, the committee spoke in measured tones, as if careful diction could disguise hesitation. Words like liability, precedent, and risk assessment floated above the table like gray birds circling a wound. She spoke with restraint, because passion frightened administrators more than disease. She described the boy's condition, his relentless cellular decay, the genetic misprints that aged him 3 times faster. Her voice was clear, not pleading but resolute, a surgeon dissecting the argument instead of the body. She presented charts, progression rates, and molecular pathways as if she could will the data into compassion. But the room's pulse remained bureaucratic, slow, deliberate, heartless in its rhythm. "We cannot justify compassionate use," someone said, his tie the color of caution tape. "The therapy hasn't cleared pediatric trials." Elena's jaw tightened, but she answered softly, "He doesn't have time to wait for trials. His cells don't respect our timelines." Another member shifted, uncomfortable with the truth's intimacy. Raphael had told her once that hospitals love clocks more than people. She was beginning to understand how right he'd been. When she left the room, the corridor felt colder. The verdict wasn't a refusal yet, but it had the smell of one. She leaned against the wall outside and exhaled, counting the seconds it took for disappointment to turn into resolve. Down the hall, she could see Noah's room through the glass, a small world lit by monitors and the paper sun taped to the window. He was awake, sketching on a notepad, lips pursed in concentration, his mother dozing in the chair beside him. Elena walked in quietly, not wanting to disturb the fragile peace. Noah looked up. "Did they say yes?" he asked, and she hated how children could aim directly at the truth. "They're thinking," she said, taking a seat by his bed. "That means they haven't said no." He studied her for a moment, as if measuring whether hope could fit inside that sentence. Then he nodded. "Thinking is good," he said softly, and returned to his drawing. He was designing a clock tower this time, tall, elegant, impossibly intricate. But at the top, instead of hands, there was a tree, branches spreading where numbers should be. "This one doesn't tell time," he explained without being asked. "It grows." Elena smiled, "the kind that almost hurts." "That's a better kind of clock," she said. Across the hospital, Raphael prepared for rounds, but his mind kept circling back to the boy. He had seen hearts fail, lungs give up, brains forget their names. But there was something about Noah's condition that rewrote his understanding of tragedy, not sudden, not loud, but a slow rebellion of the body against itself. He found Elena in the break room, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. "They won't approve it," she said before he spoke. "They're afraid of being wrong." He sat across from her, folding his hands. "Then we'll make them afraid of doing nothing." Their eyes met, a flicker of the old understanding passing between them, that dangerous, necessary thing that had once drawn them together, faith in impossible odds. Later that evening, while the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythm, Elena began drafting a letter, formal, surgical, impossible to ignore. She cited case precedents, emergency clauses, and ethical frameworks that allowed discretion in life-threatening cases. She wrote until the paper blurred, until the argument transformed from plea to promise. Outside her office window, rain began to fall, slow and deliberate, like the ticking of mercy. In room 7C, Noah couldn't sleep. The pain in his joints was quiet tonight, but the thoughts were not. He wondered what it felt like to age like everyone else, slowly enough to forget it was happening. He touched his face, the skin already folding into lines that belonged to someone's father, not a child. He whispered a question to the dark, not to God but to the air. How much older am I now? Lydia stirred in her sleep, murmuring his name. He smiled faintly, not wanting her to wake and see his tears. The rain pressed against the glass, and somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed softly, reminding him that not every sound in hospitals had to hurt. That night, Elena's letter made its way into the inbox of the ethics chair. She didn't know if it would change anything, but she knew this: time had already stolen enough from him. It was her turn to steal something back. By morning, the rain had washed the city into a softer version of itself. The glass corridors of St. Augustine's Hospital glowed with that sterile gold light that makes even sorrow look momentarily clean. Elena hadn't slept, though her reflection in the window pretended otherwise. The email reply had arrived at 5:43 a.m. short, formal, and devastating in its restraint. Request denied. Further discussion postponed until next quarter. She read it twice before closing the laptop. Denial, she thought, was easier to print than to carry. But Noah didn't have another quarter. He barely had another season. She slipped the folded paper into her coat pocket like a wound she refused to bandage. Then she headed toward 7C, where a child was learning, faster than any adult should, how to wait. Inside, the room was still half asleep. Lydia stirred when Elena entered, her hair caught in the elastic of last night's exhaustion. Noah was awake already, sketchbook on his knees. He greeted the doctor with that shy, weary smile that had become a language of its own. "Good morning," he said, voice rough but alive. "You look like you fought someone in your dreams." Elena knelt beside him, the way you do when the truth deserves your full height lowered. "Something like that," she whispered. The board said no. She expected disappointment, maybe even tears. But Noah just nodded, calm, old in the way pain ages people. "Then we find another way," he said, as if the problem were a maze and not his own body. His composure broke her a little. Children weren't supposed to console their doctors. Yet here he was 12, 36, ageless, rearranging her despair into something usable. Raphael entered then, carrying two coffees and a folder pressed against his chest. His eyes caught hers, a quiet signal, not yet lost. When Noah's mother stepped out to take a call, Raphael closed the door halfway and set the folder on the bed. "There's a research group in São Paulo," he said, voice low. "They've been working with a modified enzyme cascade off the books, but promising. They need a candidate with Noah's mutation profile." Elena blinked, torn between awe and fear. "That's halfway across the world," she said. "And unregistered trials are sometimes the only kind that save lives," Raphael cut in, not harsh, just human. They both fell silent, listening to the rhythmic beeping that measured Noah's heart like a metronome counting down. Elena's mind wrestled with protocol, duty, conscience, the triangle that breaks all good doctors. She imagined her license, her career, her credibility dissolving. But then she imagined the boy, laughing in sunlight that didn't feel borrowed. Noah looked up from his sketchbook, sensing the weight of their silence. "Is this about me again?" he asked softly. Elena smiled faintly. "Everything here is about you." He thought for a second, then said, "Then promise me one thing. Don't stop trying just because it's hard. Grown-ups do that a lot." Later that afternoon, the hospital's courtyard filled with low winter light. Noah was wheeled outside under a blanket, his first breath of fresh air in weeks. The sky was the pale blue of forgiveness. Raphael adjusted the oxygen tube while Elena crouched beside the chair, her eyes following the line of his jaw, so fragile, so stubbornly alive. "You know," he said suddenly, "I used to think the sky was running out too, but it always comes back." Elena smiled. "That's what the world does when it loves something, it finds a way to return." In her pocket, her phone vibrated. One unread message. It was from an unknown number, the subject line blank. She opened it, heart accelerating. A single sentence appeared on the screen. "We're willing to talk. Midnight. Confidential." No signature, but she didn't need one. She recognized the rhythm of rebellion in those words. When she looked up, Noah was watching her. "Was that good news?" he asked, She hesitated, then nodded. Maybe the best kind, dangerous and necessary. He smiled, that uneven, exhausted smile that had become her compass. Then go, he whispered. If it's dangerous, it's probably worth it. That night, Elena didn't sleep again. She packed her courage between pages of research notes, printed falsified travel logs, and boarded a red-eye flight she wasn't technically authorized to take. The rain had followed her to the airport, tapping against the window like an impatient friend. In the hospital, Raphael stayed behind. He kept vigil beside Noah's bed, pretending to review cardiac data while secretly watching the boy dream. Every few minutes, he adjusted the four-line or straightened the blanket rituals of defiance, small prayers disguised as tasks. He whispered once, so softly the machines couldn't hear, "Hold on, kid. She's coming back with a miracle." And far above the sleeping city, Elena's plane cut through clouds like a scalpel through silence, chasing a tomorrow that refused to wait. The engines hummed beneath her like the low growl of something alive, ancient, and mercifully stubborn. Elena sat by the window, face half lit by the glow of an indifferent moon. She held the dossier in her lap, 40 pages of defiance printed in 12-point font, each one a quiet rebellion against time. The flight attendants whispered past, pushing carts of soft drinks and compromise. She sipped water, because coffee would make her heart race, and she needed it steady for what came next. Somewhere over the Atlantic, she allowed herself to close her eyes. In the dark, Noah's voice followed her, small, determined, already echoing through the future he refused to surrender. If it's dangerous, it's probably worth it. She smiled faintly, realizing that courage often sounded like a child giving permission. When the plane touched down in São Paulo, the sky was gray and generous with rain. She stepped into it without an umbrella, feeling the cold sting her face awake. The research facility was buried in the outskirts, surrounded by eucalyptus and secrecy. Inside, fluorescent light replaced sunlight with something harsher but just as necessary. Dr. Almeida, the lead geneticist, met her in a room that smelled of sterilizer and sleeplessness. He was younger than she expected, eyes bright with that dangerous mix of intellect and desperation. "I read your message," he said, skipping greetings. "You have a candidate." Elena opened the folder, sliding the pages toward him like confessions. Noah Calder, 12 years old. Accelerated aging phenotype, compound mutation across LMNA and WRN genes. We've stabilized organ function, but not cell decay. He scanned the data, nodding once, twice, then stopped. This could work. He looked up, and the air shifted. "But you understand, doctor, there's no safety net here. No government protection, no insurance, no backup." Elena met his eyes. "There's no time either." He exhaled, a decision forming somewhere between science and faith. "We'll prepare the vector," he said. "You'll need to get consent signed, and bring him here quietly." Back in Salvador, Raphael woke to a call at dawn, the kind that breaks sleep but builds resolve. Elena's voice came through the static, clear and trembling. "They'll take him," she said. "They'll start in 72 hours. He didn't ask about legality. He didn't ask about risk. He only said, then we move now." In room 7C, the morning sun was pale and kind. Noah was awake early, sketching again. This time it was an airport, planes stretching toward clouds, engines drawn like wings that refused to close. When Raphael entered, the boy looked up and grinned. "You came early," he said. Raphael smiled, though something heavy shadowed his face. "How do you feel today?" "Old," Noah answered with a shrug, "but still here." The cardiologist sat beside him, the rhythm of monitors filling the silence between words. "Would you take a trip?" he asked suddenly, "if it meant feeling better for a while?" Noah tilted his head. "You mean, like a vacation?" "Something like that," Raphael said softly. "A place where people want to help you. Somewhere they don't care about rules." Noah smiled, eyes half bright with hope. "Then I'd go anywhere." By evening, they had forged the papers, a referral transfer to a specialized pediatric facility abroad. Lydia hesitated when Elena called from Brazil, her voice steady but thin. "Lydia, it's not official, but it's real. It's dangerous, but it's a chance." There was silence, then the quiet sound of a mother's decision being made. "Tell me where to sign." That night, Raphael stayed late after rounds, finalizing lab clearances and deleting the trail behind them. He looked at Noah one last time before leaving the ward. The boy was asleep, sketchbook still open, pencil slipping from his hand. On the paper, unfinished, was the outline of a bridge connecting to distant cities. The next morning, before dawn, they moved. A private ambulance, a forged authorization, a child wrapped in layers of blankets and quiet prayers. The world outside was still asleep when the vehicle merged onto the highway, taillights vanishing into fog. Inside, Noah stirred, half awake. "Where are we going?" he murmured. Elena turned from the front seat, her face tired but alive with purpose. "To find you more time," he smiled faintly. "Then don't drive too fast." The road stretched endlessly ahead, wet with morning rain. Behind them, the hospital slowly disappeared, and with it, every line they had just crossed. They weren't doctors anymore. They were fugitives with faith. By the time the plane touched the runway again, dawn had cracked open like a fragile shell. Snow Paulo glimmered beneath a gauze of mist and traffic, a city that never quite woke up or slept. Inside the small medical transport jet, the hum of the engines mixed with the steady pulse of Noah's monitor, soft, rhythmic, hauntingly human. Elena sat beside him, her hand resting lightly over his, while Raphael watched from across the aisle, eyes fixed on the green waves that rose and fell on the screen. The boy had slept most of the flight, his breathing shallow but steady. At some point, he had whispered through his dreams, fragments of numbers, names, places that didn't exist. Elena leaned closer, hearing the edges of his imagination. The city where no one grows old, the stairs that go only up, the hospital made of light. She closed her eyes, memorizing every word as if they were coordinates. When they arrived at the facility, Dr. Almeida was already waiting, the lab coat over a gray hoodie, exhaustion etched into brilliance. He led them through white corridors lined with security doors and whispered science. Inside the main lab, the air buzzed with machines, centrifuges, incubators, and the low electric hum of possibility. The walls were covered with diagrams of genetic sequences, tiny spirals of code that looked almost like poetry written by the universe before humans learned to read. Noah's bed was prepared in an isolated glass room, sterile but luminous. As they wheeled him in, his eyes flickered open. "This doesn't look like a hospital," he murmured. Elena smiled faintly. "That's because it isn't. It's where hospitals come to learn what's next." Over the next 12 hours, the preparation began, enzymes thawed, vectors calibrated, cell cultures checked for viability. Raphael adjusted cardiac monitors with hands steady as conviction, while Elena reviewed each protocol line by line, her voice a whisper of calculation and prayer. The therapy itself was a storm in a syringe, a re-engineered viral vector designed to repair what time had stolen from his DNA. If it worked, his cells would stop aging 3 times faster. If it failed, they would stop altogether. Before the injection, Lydia held her son's hand through the glass, both palms pressed against the cold divide. "You're my whole life, Noah," she said, tears threading down her face. "And if I could, I'd give you mine." He smiled weakly. "You already did." Elena entered the room, dressed in sterile white. Her gloved hands trembled only once before she steadied them. "Ready?" she asked. Noah nodded. "I've been ready for 12 years, he said. The needle slid in with a grace that belied its meaning. Raphael watched the monitor, heart rate stable, oxygen good, pressure holding. But beneath the numbers, time itself seemed to hesitate, as if deciding whether to resume or yield. For a moment, everyone forgot to breathe. Then Noah exhaled, a long, slow sigh, and the air in the room seemed to thicken with something invisible but real. The monitors continued their rhythm. The boy's face softened, his breathing steadied. The clock on the wall, so loud before, seemed almost gentle now. Hours passed like seconds, no fever, no collapse. Just stillness, and then, something impossible. The gray tone of his skin began to warm, faint color returning to his cheeks. The tremor in his fingers eased. He fell asleep with his hands still holding Elena's, his pulse calm, his body no longer racing against itself. Outside the glass, Raphael pressed his hands to his face, disbelief cutting through exhaustion. Lydia sobbed into her sleeve, the sound raw and holy. Dr. Almeida murmured, "It's working. My God, it's actually working." Elena didn't answer. She stayed by Noah's side, watching him breathe like someone watching the tide after a long storm, afraid to believe the sea could be kind again. By dawn, she stepped outside the lab, her body collapsing against the corridor wall. Her breath came in shallow bursts, not from fear now, but from the unbearable weight of hope realized. Raphael found her there, sliding down the wall, tears streaking through the pale exhaustion on her face. "It's holding," he whispered. "His markers are stabilizing. Elena, you did it." She shook her head weakly. "We did it. He did it." In the glass room beyond, Noah slept peacefully for the first time in years. The paper sun he had brought from his hospital room hung by his bed, taped to the monitor. Its edges fluttered softly in the recycled air, catching the faintest hint of morning light. For a while, nobody spoke. The machines hummed like lullabies. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, the boy who once aged 3 times faster was teaching time a new rhythm, one heartbeat at a time. For 3 days, Noah slept as if the world had promised to wait for him. His body, once trapped in acceleration, began to slow, not the exhaustion of dying, but the deliberate stillness of healing. Elena hardly left his side. She read the lab results every morning, scanning numbers that used to bring despair and now felt like fragile victories. Mitochondrial function up, cellular turnover normalized. Telomere degradation paused. It was science, yes, but it felt like grace measured in nanometers. Lydia hovered near the doorway most of the time, unable to believe that silence could mean safety. In hospitals, quiet was rarely good news. But this was a new kind of silence, heavy, warm, filled with the faint rhythm of heart monitors that sounded almost musical. Every few hours, Raphael entered, stethoscope around his neck, listening with reverence instead of suspicion. "It's steady," he'd whisper, as though saying it too loud might undo it. On the 4th morning, Noah woke up. His eyelids fluttered open to light streaming through the blinds. He blinked slowly, confused by how normal it felt to breathe. The first thing he saw was Elena asleep in a chair beside him, her head tilted, her hair falling across her face like punctuation after too many nights without rest. He smiled faintly. "You look older," he said. She stirred, startled, then laughed, that low, unguarded laugh that belongs only to people who've almost lost everything. "You're one to talk," she murmured. "How do you feel?" He looked at his hands, turning them slowly. The skin no longer papery, the veins less pronounced. "Lighter," he said after a while, "like my bones finally forgave me." Raphael entered then, carrying a new set of results. He froze when he saw the boy awake, color in his face, warmth in his eyes. "Good morning, time traveler," he said, voice unsteady. Noah grinned. "Did I miss anything?" "Only the part where you scared every adult in this building," Raphael replied, smiling despite himself. They ran more tests that day, not out of doubt, but wonder. The results were consistent, almost unbelievable. His DNA repair markers were stable. His heart showed signs of regeneration. It was as though his cells had been reminded of how to be young and decided they liked it. But miracles, Elena knew, were never given freely. That evening, while the others celebrated quietly with coffee and cautious smiles, she sat alone in the lab reviewing the enzyme cascade data. There was an anomaly, a subtle rise in inflammatory markers, nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to whisper danger. She watched the numbers climb with a scientist's dread and a mother's denial. Raphael found her there, eyes locked on the screen. "You see it too?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "It might be nothing, or it might be the vector triggering an immune rebound. If it's the latter," he didn't let her finish. "Then we fight again, like before." They returned to Noah's room, where he was drawing once more. This time, it was a bridge, the same one he had sketched before their escape, but now complete. Across it, 2 small figures stood together under a paper sun. "It's you and me," he said, holding it up to Elena. "See, we made it across." She smiled, forcing the fear to stay hidden beneath the warmth. "You're getting better at your drugs," she said. "I'm getting better at everything," he replied softly. Later, when the lights dimmed and machines hummed their nocturnal lullaby, Elena stood by the window, looking out at the sleeping city. The rain had started again, soft and patient. Raphael joined her, leaning against the frame. "You're not celebrating," he said quietly. "Not yet," she answered. "Miracles have fine print. I just haven't found it all." He turned to her. "You saved him, Elena. Whatever comes next, that's still true." She met his gaze. "I didn't save him. I bought him time. Maybe that's all any of us ever do." In the glass room behind them, Noah stirred, then settled again, his small body framed in light. The paper sun above his bed shifted slightly in the air conditioning breeze, its crumpled rays catching the glow of the monitors. And for that moment, just that moment, time forgot to count. By the fifth day, the hospital's corridors began whispering words that didn't usually belong there: reversal, remission, recovery. Nurses paused by the glass room, pretending to check vitals just to see the boy who had taught medicine to hesitate. Even the machines seemed gentler, their tones softened by awe. Elena tried to let herself believe it. Tried to imagine a future where temporary didn't always hide behind every miracle. Noah was walking now, slow and unsteady, but walking. His steps were small, like someone learning choreography from a forgiving God. Each footfall a protest against the arithmetic that had once ruled his life. Lydia followed him with her hands half raised, ready to catch him, though he no longer needed catching. Raphael stood near the window, arms crossed, smiling at something he couldn't put into words. "Doctor," Noah said, stopping in the middle of the room, "does this mean I'm like everyone else now?" Raphael hesitated. "It means you've joined the rest of us, waiting for tomorrow and pretending we know what it means." Noah laughed, the sound so pure it startled them. "Then I think I like pretending." That afternoon, Elena called for another full scan, just to be certain. The results came back clean, every parameter, every marker, every sign that had once betrayed him now read as normal. Yet the anomaly she had seen before still haunted her. It had quieted, but not vanished. A sleeping fault line beneath a rebuilt city. She said nothing. Not yet. That night, they gathered in his room for what passed as a celebration. Lydia brought a cupcake from the cafeteria, one candle trembling in the air conditioning's breeze. "Make a wish," she whispered. Noah stared at the flame, the orange light reflected in eyes that had seen too much. "I don't think I'll waste it on wishing," he said finally. "I'd rather promise." Raphael leaned in. "What kind of promise?" "That I'll build those hospitals of light I told you about," he said. "The kind where nobody counts days, not even doctors." He blew out the candle, and the room fell into gentle darkness, broken only by the steady glow of the monitors. For the first time, no one rushed to turn on the lights. But long after everyone had fallen asleep, Lydia in the chair, Raphael slumped against the wall, Elena resting her forehead against folded arms, a faint alarm blinked on the central monitor. Not a warning, not yet, just a whisper of imbalance. A flare of immune response where none should be. Elena stirred awake, the kind of instinct only sleepless doctors possess. She crossed the room, eyes narrowing at the numbers, pulse steady, oxygen stable. But the inflammatory index, rising again, subtle, insistent. She silenced the alarm before it woke the others and stood very still, the weight of knowledge pressing against her chest. Raphael woke to find her staring at the screen. "What is it?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, her voice barely audible, the fine print. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt fragile, sacred, dangerous. Then Raphael took her hand, fingers cold, and said, "Whatever happens next, he's already lived more in these 5 days than most people do in 50 years. That has to count for something." Elena nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the monitor. "It counts," she whispered, "but I want it to last." The rain returned that night, slow, deliberate, washing the windows in rhythm with Noah's heartbeats. He slept peacefully through it, unaware that somewhere deep within his cells the battle had begun again, silent, invisible, unwilling to surrender. Elena watched him sleep until dawn. She thought of every patient she had lost, every rule she had broken, every promise she had made to herself about never believing in miracles again. And then she realized something that felt both cruel and beautiful. Believing wasn't about expecting them. It was about choosing to try again when they ended. When the morning came, the sun broke through the clouds, flooding the room in gold. Noah stirred, eyes opening to the light. He smiled weakly. "Morning, doctor." Elena smiled back, though her chest ached with knowing. "Morning, Noah." And as she reached out to adjust his blanket, she whispered something he would never hear but the universe might. "Stay." The final sunrise in Snow Paulo came quietly, slipping through the blinds like a secret. Noah's room glowed gold, and for a moment, everything looked whole, the machine steady, the air still, his small chest rising and falling as if sleep were enough to hold the world together. But Elena knew. She had known since the night before, when the markers began to climb again, when the immune cascade turned from whisper to roar. The therapy had given him life, but now his body, confused by Grace, was beginning to unmake it. Raphael arrived before dawn. He didn't ask for updates, he read them in her eyes. Lydia was awake already, sitting beside her son, combing his hair the way mothers do when words are useless. The paper sun still hung above his bed, its edges curled and fading, but it refused to fall. Noah opened his eyes. Is it morning again? Elena nodded. It's morning. He smiled faintly. Then I made it. His voice was thin, but his gaze steady, that strange calm of children who know more than they're told. I can feel it, he whispered. The clock's getting louder. Elena took his hand. You made it slow down, Noah. You did what none of us could. He studied her face, then looked at Raphael. Don't be sad, you fixed me. Just, not forever. Raphael swallowed hard. Forever isn't the goal, kid, he said, forcing a small smile. Just enough time to matter. Then we did it, Noah whispered. Outside, the rain started again, light, rhythmic, merciful. The room filled with the sound of it tapping against the glass, like the heartbeat of the world keeping time for him. Lydia pressed her forehead against his, whispering a lullaby from when he was little, the kind she used to sing on nights he was afraid of the dark. Elena watched the monitor numbers begin to drift, heart rate slowing, oxygen falling. The machines, those faithful witnesses of mortality, began their quiet warnings. She reached for his hand again, small, impossibly warm, and felt it tremble once before going still. The last thing he said, barely a breath, was, "Tell the world I wasn't afraid." When the monitor fell silent, nobody moved. Raphael closed his eyes. Lydia held him to her chest, rocking slightly, as if her love could fool the laws of biology for one more minute. And Elena, standing beside the bed, felt something vast and wordless pass through her, not despair, not peace, but the unbearable truth that even miracles have endings. Hours later, as sunlight spilled through the rain, she stepped into the courtyard outside the lab. The city was waking, indifferent and alive. She took a deep breath and let it hurt. Raphael joined her, carrying the paper sun Noah had made. Its tape was torn, but it still caught the light. He wanted this by a window, Raphael said softly. Together, they pressed it to the glass, where it fluttered gently in the breeze. He stopped aging, Elena said after a long silence. Just, sooner than we hoped. Raphael looked at her, eyes red but steady. He didn't stop time, Elena. He taught it mercy. Weeks later, the story of the boy who aged 3 times faster would travel quietly through the medical world, stripped of names, buried in anonymity, but alive in the minds of those who read it. Doctors would argue, journals would debate, ethics boards would condemn, but none of that mattered. Somewhere, in a hospital across the ocean, a paper sun still clung to a window, and on quiet nights, when the rain returned, Elena would hear the faint echo of his laugh in her memory, that fragile, golden sound that reminded her why she had broken the rules in the first place, not to defy death, but to give life a chance to say thank you.